And so we had this from the time I was, really little. We had this Walt Kelly pogo in the house, and it had the lettering on the board, of course. And so to me, like I always saw the idea of comic art without the lettering in place, like never occurred to me that that would be a thing that would exist.
Hey, I'm Alex Morrissey. Welcome to Tradecraft. Each episode, I discuss the creative life and process with the people responsible for the books and comics we love. My guest today is a well-hyphenated individual, cartoonist, writer, father, husband and partner, puppeteer, actor, Kentucky colonel, martial artist, and teacher. Chris Schweizer is a thoughtful creator who uses his insatiable curiosity to write and illustrate comics, and much more. Not only does Chris make Eisner-nominated comics, he manifests pieces of these worlds into reality through prop creation, explainers, and some become new outlets. Like the super cool Schweizercraft wood products and his insanely successful limited edition Kickstarter book, A Dream of Swords. Chris's love of history and background in teaching comes through in his work and outreach. You see it in his social media posts, YouTube videos, and feel it on every page. It's all there in the books like The Roanoke Colony, America's First Mystery, his nonfiction, Fix-A-Car, The Krogan Adventures, and his upcoming Outlaw's Apprentice. Check out his website, then follow him online to experience his personal touch. There's a good chance you'll read his books and become a fan of his original comics and tales. Stan Sakai said it best. Chris Schweizer is an amazingly talented cartoonist with an ear for dialogue and an eye for great storytelling. I'd add, exceptional word balloon designs. This is me with Chris Schweizer. First off, thanks for coming.
No, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. I'm excited about it.
And thanks for sharing this stuff. I absolutely love the Outlaw's Apprentice.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm so on board for this. You showed me a few things when we were together and Heroes, but it was on your phone and you were trying to show me the features of it being on the phone. I was like, oh, that's cool. But just sitting, with the iPad and getting to look at the compositions a little closer and the artwork and the process, it's great. I don't know if it dovetails into the Robin Hood drawings you were showcasing recently.
It doesn't. One definitely informs the other. I mean, Robin Hood's a big influence with it. I always loved those growing up, and that was the kind of stories that I gravitated towards. Like for fantasy and historical adventure and things along those lines, I never really got much into the dynastic stuff. The things with kings and successions and stuff along those lines. Like they were far less of interest to me than guy on the street. So if I'm watching Game of Thrones, like I want to see the Hound and Arya walking around. I don't really care about what's happening in the castles. So that's a big part of it is wanting to touch on that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. And I so appreciate Martin for his going around story-wise with all these different people, where you're not just stuck with this core group of adventurers or heroes or whatever the thing is, that everybody's story is as exciting, dangerous, and important in the long run, which is super hard to achieve, I think, on let alone in a literary sense, but in a comic book sense, it's even tougher because the physical nature of the books and the time it takes to achieve just a single page really restricts people from getting this development level in there. And you have to do a lot of shortcutting and figuring things out. The puzzle pieces have to be a bit bigger to fit together.
And I think that's something with Outlaws that I'm having a little bit of fun with. Is I've always done essentially single protagonist or single protagonists. Like
Mm-hmm.
whoever in the case of an ensemble book, it's still whoever my lead ensemble is. We're only seeing them. We're never seeing tertiary characters. We're never seeing antagonists. Things along those lines. There were a lot of things that I thought of as sort of self-imposed rules
Mm-hmm.
that I was, for lack of a better word, for classiness, I didn't want to do. So, like, thought captions, speed lines,
Mm-hmm.
jumping around narratively. Like, there were a lot of things that I was like, I don't do that. I'm going to stick to this thing. And one of the things that I'm trying to embrace with this project is taking those restrictions off myself, because I
Mm-hmm.
still have a lot of restrictions, but they tend to be now more formal than narrative.
Okay.
But one of them is those jumping arounds, because I think that can create that nice, little did they know
Yeah.
vibe that adds a degree of stress or adds a degree of concern, and also makes those secondary characters more interesting,
Mm-hmm.
because they have a little bit more page time to flush out who they are and like what their motivations are and that kind of thing.
Yeah. I totally get that. I remember writing my first novel, and it was very much close third person to like this group of characters,
Mm-hmm.
and they're doing their thing, and then I had this sort of moment where one of the characters is no longer in the group,
Mm-hmm.
and then we see the character way at the end of the book, and like one of my readers was like, well, hey, like, kind of want to know what happened to that guy, like what happened between point D and point R. And you go, all right, so you start writing that, and then you realize I should probably tip in maybe some of the bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
Let the reader get a little bit ahead of the characters, and rather than it
Yeah.
just be, let's see how clever the characters can be responding to crisis and problems, let's have the reader go like, they're not getting out of this,
Yeah.
before the characters even have an idea what's happening.
Yeah. And I think there's challenge to that, and there's danger to that. It can make it to where threats feel less, they can both feel more immediate and less immediate, and like
Mm-hmm.
trying to find that balance. Given that it's something I've never done before, a lot of it is just relying on intuition. And I think that served me well when I was starting writing and when I was doing my first books, is a lot of it was gut before I was starting to quantify how I thought everything worked. And it's kind of nice going back to that gut.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'll write out dialogue and scenes scene by scene, but I'll get to the end of a panel and I'll say, oh, that's the end of the scene. Like, I had another 2 pages of dialogue, but it's out the window because this feels like the beat on which to end.
Yeah.
Just sort of letting it be a little bit more free form with that has been really liberating. It's also the first time in a really long time that I have done a book that didn't have a set page count ahead of time.
Yeah.
And that has allowed me to breathe a little bit more easily. Like, I can hit a set page count, but it's nice not having to.
Yeah. I mean, it's I guess it's a scary proposition in comics to have no set page count.
Yeah.
I remember talking with Noah Van Sciver, and he did his book on the founder of the Mormon Church. He's like, yeah, and that, like, it was X amount of pages long, and then I started working it, and then I would go back and I would start adding pages here, adding pages there, and it ballooned into 400 pages.
Yeah.
He's like, it's all my own fault. Like, it's not the fault of the publisher or anybody else but me needing to get the story that I needed to get out.
That to me is lovely. Like, having that agency to go in and make the project what you need it to make. And I say that as somebody who gets really mad when books and movies and comics balloon out of the scope of what I think they probably should be. Like, I'm like, you can cut this stuff. But with comics especially, we tend to cut so ruthlessly. Part of that is I don't think anybody uses the same degree of, or the same amount of text that was being used 30 years ago. You pick up a comic 30 years ago, 50 years ago, it feels as though there's not a homogeny between the image and the amount of text that's on there by contemporary standards. But what that means is when you're doing a set page count is you're getting less story. You can pick up an old Vertigo book or an old Marvel book or whatever it might be and get 3 times as much text from these older things than you would something now. And if somebody tried to do that now, it would feel wrong.
Yeah.
And I think that, but what that means is that the comics are breathing more, but they're not being given the page space to breathe more. And I think you saw more of that with the initial graphic novel boom. But I think as a lot of people have switched back to doing a lot of direct market stuff because you have a clearer sense as to what you're doing. And because really middle reader and YA is the only financially regularly viable market for graphic novel stuff, like, you don't really have a choice other than to do direct market stuff.
Yeah.
So I feel like having that freedom to expand a little bit is really important. And I don't know what the market realities of that are outside of Kickstarter, because I think that there isn't really, I'm not really sure. Publishing wise, books are pricey to print, and the more people who have slices of the pie, the less pie that feeds.
Yeah, no, totally. And there's always going to be a certain set number of people who get a huge slice just by the body of their work and their story, their precedent that they've set. So there's a lot, there's a lot of people, crowding around that one, maybe those 2 tables, the middle grade and the YA market. I do rue the fact that there feels to be less and less push by these big 5 publishers in this space to not try to grow with their readership.
Yeah. And I think there is some effort. I don't know how successful it's going to be. First Second launched their adult imprint, or Macmillan, I guess, launched their adult imprint, which I think is 23rd Street.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I don't know if it has books out yet, but hopefully that'll do well. Pantheon reaches a very specific type of graphic novel reader, which is not usually the genre stuff. As somebody who largely works in genre, it feels like genre stuff is still almost exclusively limited to comics publishers.
It's a double-edged sword, because it's genre and it's comics. So to the market share, that's double kiddie stuff versus one or the other. People go like, well, that Parasopolis or Mouse, that's real mature work. So it's a very hard sell. Like, I mean, if Jeff Smith came out with Bone now, it would be definitely put into a category and sort of held there. It has the luxury of 30 plus years of people going like, well, this is very special.
Yeah. And how those categories is also sort of tricky. That's another thing with Outlaw, is that I'm wrestling with the fact that it is probably early YA, but there's a fairly high body count.
Yeah.
Or will be. And it's not something that I want to. It's not like Disney Three Musketeers where people are dying left and right and there's not consequence to it. Like, everybody, there's an emotional toll to it. There's a social toll to it.
The first, literally, in the first chunk of your book, there is huge ramification for violence.
Yeah.
That's the whole principle. Like that, there's your inciting, your inciting incident. That's it.
Yeah.
Done.
Well, and I think, and it's also something that it's giving me and I don't have an answer for it or a theme that I'm necessarily trying to push, but I wrestle, part of it is growing up in the area that I grew up. Everybody fought a lot, it was just a part of it. I think it's probably a rural thing. I have a very complicated philosophical relationship with violence and its usage to do good, and what the consequences of attempting to use it to do good are. And I think that, I don't know, I think fiction is a great place for us to wrestle with those things and to sort of watch them play out. And if we're honest with ourselves as writers and to our readers, we're going to really latch on to the parts that make us the most uncomfortable and that we have the hardest time reconciling.
I was just saying the other day to someone that's been rolling in my head the idea that we can be easily punished for our unpopular thoughts
Mhm.
in society, but we could become highly praised as writers for putting these into stories,
Yeah.
because when we wrestle with them, we're able to contextualize them in a way that people can look at them with a little more objectivity rather than saying,
Mhm.
you did this, you said this, which is a great luxury.
Yeah. It's fun, but what that means is, does this now, and generally speaking, Americans have a pretty laissez-faire relationship with fictionalized violence.
Mm-hmm.
So I doubt that it will necessarily hinder library sales or things along those lines. But
Yeah.
it's something that since I'm planning to self-publish this one, it is a concern without it being a without it affecting, like while I'm working on the book, my commercial hat is not on.
Mm-hmm.
I do think about it, but it's not going to change the content. But yeah, every time I put something in, even though it's not changing the content, I'm like, does this mean no middle school talks? I don't know how it works. So yeah.
And I think that's so important. Like the artist has to be the artist at the time of creation, and then let the business person figure out how to sell the thing.
Yeah.
You may have to have a few conversations in the middle, going like, well, wait a minute, can
Yeah.
we, but like that's a negotiation that we have to kind of go through, because I think if we put these, I mean, and it's not the I wouldn't consider them the restrictions or the confines of what we were discussing earlier. Maybe whether you don't want to use thought balloons or narrators boxes or page count, but the idea that don't restrict yourself in that creative expression, because when you allow yourself to kind of venture into territories where you didn't have an idea where you go,
Mhm.
often they may be a little uncomfortable, but those places you will find probably the more interesting material.
Yeah. And that's so much of the fun of making comics for me, is that sense of discovery along the way. And I'm sure that would be the case if I were doing any other storytelling medium. But for me, it's comics. Is letting those moments direct what the story is, and how your characters are acting, and how your character which shot choices that you're doing. Going back through, I just finished the first yesterday evening, very late. I finished the first of the three sections that the book is broken into. The first book, there were panels that I'd draw, and then I'd be like, no, that's not quite right, and I'd go in and I'd change them up and change who is being shown in that particular moment. Do you show the character who is speaking, or do you show the reaction of the character who is listening? Are they waiting to talk? Like, all of that kind of stuff. It's just it's so much fun, but to me, so much of it is intuitive. But that doesn't mean that the intuitive isn't grounded in conscious decision making. Like, it's sort of it's a balance of letting your gut tell you what it should be, but also saying, okay, well, if I put this character to the left over here, that's suggesting that they have more space across which to traverse metaphorically, and there's so
Yeah.
there's it's this constant juggling of the gut and the brain, and I
Mm-hmm.
love that juggle. Like, that's my favorite, and I try to give both of them as much sway as possible.
It was a thing that I recognized, I don't know, midish way through my 10 years of drawing comic books, was when my stomach felt like I was getting ready to go down on the roller coaster. I'm like,
Hmm.
that's when it was working. Like, I'm
Yeah.
like, that's like this whole sort of nervous energy kind of thing that was happening in my gut was where that was my sensor of like, okay, I think I'm onto something, because I feel really kind of on the edge of like crashing or landing on my feet.
Yeah. But there's a lot less formal decision making on this one than some. So I talked to you about this at Heroes, but we haven't talked about it on here yet. So one of the things that I'm doing with this is I'm working a lot smaller page wise than I have in the past, to the point that there's usually only 3 panels per page at most. Sometimes there's more than that, but it is very rare. and a lot of times it's 2 panels per page. The reason for that is to allow for easy readability for an entire page on a phone, which I think is how, if I'm wanting to reach a teen audience, which I am, like that's where they're reading it these days. But what that means is that a lot of the formal decision making over making sure that a page reads in its entirety very well, so far as reading order from one panel to the next, and then how those affect the panel below it and above it. Those are essentially becoming non-issues because I don't have a lot of side-by-side panels. And so while I love the doing of that, like that guiding the eye through the page, I'm essentially just guiding the eye from one panel down to the next. And it's making the composition of each panel in each page go so much faster because I'm not having to weigh how these different parts interconnect to the whole. And it's also making editing so much easier. Like editing a page in the past was doable, but it was meant redrawing the 2 pages on either side of it because you introduce a new panel and everything around it changes. And now I can introduce a new panel, and that's wildly new for me. Like I've never had that ability to do so before. And you still have to do some tweaks, but it's much less so than was ever the case in the past. And so that's also making the fact that it's a bigger book less of an issue because each page takes a little bit less time to lay out.
Matt Madden, cartoonist and an educator of comic books, he's a huge fan of putting your own constraints on the things. My wife being an actual real artist, and people go, oh, it's great the 2 of you are artists. And for years, I'm like, I'm not an artist. Like I am a designer. Like I solve other people's problems for their business. Like I'm not sitting around going like, hey, I got a good logo idea. Anyone want to buy it? Like it doesn't work that way. But the thing is that what the creativity that comes in the commercial works comes out of these constraints. You have time, you have space, you have budget, you have whatever the things are. You have the fact that the client hates the color blue. It's whatever these things are, and you have to solve these things with some sort of aplomb so they can feel that the money they're paying you is worth it, and hopefully the business continues well, and you get called another call. To be able to put it on yourself, it's not an easy thing for most people to do. I don't think people in this comic industry think in those terms. They don't go, they go, okay, well, it has to be 20 pages long. Okay, that's what I got. There's your structure.
Yeah. Well, and I think the constraints are, they're good and they're helpful. And historically, I've liked having a things like a set page count or dimensions. But anytime I start a project, I try to knock out as many of the concretes as possible at the early stage because I feel like that's where most of the headaches come later. And so I always want to know, like, what are my page dimensions? Ideally, what is my length? Am I working in full color? Am I working in this? Am I, if I'm working with a publisher on something over which I don't have full control, am I required to use a font? Am I required to do this or that? And so any of that kind of stuff, I try to front load. And so those become a lot of those restrictions and foundational frameworks that I have. I also get really upset. The main thing that makes me upset working professionally with anybody else is when those concretes aren't ironed out at the beginning. If I'm doing illustration for design work, if whatever text is going to be on there isn't already locked in and in place. I mean, it doesn't have to be physically locked in place, but we need to know what's on there because I design the composition entirely around what information needs to be conveyed on the page, or if it's dimensions of something changes, or anything that should have been decided before we move to, honestly, pencils, but definitely final art. And there are a lot of publishers that either don't understand how comics work or don't understand how comics work the way that I think they should work, which may be 2 very different things, who want to do late stage editing. And I feel like editing should all be done at the earliest possible stages. Like it should be done in roughs and pencils And by the time you move to final art, aside from catching typos, like nothing needs to be changed at that point,
For
because
sure.
at that point, anything that changes affects how everything else is changed, and it just makes more work for everybody that could have been addressed earlier on.
Oh yeah, I've been asked to edit a project, and it's going to be fun and really really entertaining for people. But I would say the bulk of it was already done by the time I was handed the
Mhm.
thing, and
Yeah.
it's an interesting grafting process. Fortunately, the creator is entirely open and amenable to changing things, which is
Mhm.
wonderful, because we're not looking at someone who's like, well, I'm not touching that. What can we do?
Yeah.
It's a bit of, it's an interesting challenge, but I'm with you 100%. I need to have all these things figured out. Caution tale to anybody out there listening: if you just so happen to get a really great gig with French fashion and beauty brands, you will be working to the last very possible second on
Yeah.
changes, because that's the nature of their process.
Mhm.
Chris and I apparently do not adhere to that. I like knowing everything up front.
Yeah. No, I agree wholeheartedly. I also for that reason, like lettering is usually the very first thing that I do, and not the last. And I know a lot of people back in lettering as one of the later stages, but like I build everything around the lettering. Sometimes that there's a thing I do occasionally with one of those Scholastic Classroom magazines, and they will get, oh, it's the absolute dream collaborative project, because they'll give me these pages, and it already has the text in it, and I can move the text around. I can move it, but
Mhm.
I know the font size, I know like how many words there are. If I want to move it from over here to over here, as long as it reads fine, that's fine. But having that in place means I build everything around it, and that makes it so much easier. It also means less drawing. Like I don't understand why folks are willing or desirous of drawing stuff that's going to be covered up with the lettering. Aside from the fact that it changes the nature of the composition, the balloons are going to create tangents with the line art. Like there's all kinds of stuff that are potential difficulties, but also it's just
More work. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you why.
if you've got a big batch of text, because then you can sell the pages for more.
Exactly. It's money.
Yeah,
It only
yeah,
comes down to money. I had this epiphany of talking with John Workman, who's lettered thousands and thousands of pages,
yeah.
and we're discussing it. I remember talking to some artist friends of mine, I don't know, in the last 10 years, and they're young, and none of them have pages with the lettering done on the art on the board. Like
Mhm.
they've never experienced that. And I go, oh right, like that's done in post.
Yeah,
So the whole model is now, the secondary economy of comic books
yeah,
is where it's at when it comes to being, a visual creator in that market.
yeah. Although I sell my pages that have lettering on them, and I've never had difficulty selling those. Now, granted, I don't sell them for a fortune, but to me, like that's such a part of the art
Mm-hmm.
itself. If I look at it, but also, when I was a kid, we had an original pogo in our house. It burned up in a fire when I was in high school, which is a
Oh,
real shame. But my granddad, my family was from Central Florida. There were a lot of cartoonists down there. My granddad was an architect, and some of the circles he ran in had some newspaper cartoonists, because a lot of cartoonists moved down to Central Florida in I guess probably the 70s.
mm-hmm.
Not sure exactly why. I guess cost of living, you could mail stuff into New York, etc. But he was a huge Pogo fan, and he knew somebody who knew Walt Kelly, and that person reached out to Walt Kelly and was like, "Hey, this fella really likes your things." And Walt Kelly was like, "Oh, here, give him this." And so we had this from the time I was, really little. We had this Walt Kelly Pogo in the house, and it had the lettering on the board, of course. To me, like always, the idea of comic art without the lettering in place, like
Mm-hmm.
never occurred to me that that would be a thing that would exist from the time I was little. in the originals, and so maybe that colors what my take on the. But if you go to the Billy Ireland Museum and things like that, like looking through those pages, like I love seeing the lettering on the page. It's a delight.
I guess it's a different experience. I mean, I know that when I had scripts which had, I mean, I don't even think even if they didn't have the dialogue already on the script, because Marvel books didn't always have the full script. You would just kind of get more of a breakdown of the pages. I would kind of determine in my head, like, how much the writer could write in here. And I would draw,
Yeah.
I mean, like if you go through those old pages, you'll see me drawing in all the word balloons where they could go.
Yeah.
And just that's okay. Blue pencil, it was blue pencil ovals here and there, sound effects in blue pencil, just because
Yeah.
I'm like, I wanted to know structurally how this
Yeah.
is going to look, even though the pencils would then go get inked and then,
Yeah.
I'd never see them again, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It answers, I guess, part of the question, or not the part of the question, but part of my experience when reading through Outlaws, I was like, oh, because you had all the lettering, like it's all there, all your balloons, all your
Yeah.
lettering's there, and all the, not all the artwork is done. So I'm looking at like under drawings with finished lettering, but it totally explains it. And I have a hunch. You ready for my hypothesis here?
I want to hear the hunch.
Okay. The hunch is because you are also an actor.
Well, not really, but
well, you act. You've acted. You act.
Yeah.
Dialogue is the writer's time to act.
Oh, it's a huge part of it, and not just in terms of what's being said and where you're putting your and I love bolding words, like I love force feeding the inflection to the audience, but also and some of that's body language, some of like I don't think it's a section that you've seen yet, but there's a bit where one of those side characters is going through some stuff, and it's something that could have been very much delivered like with ferocity and gusto, and I really wanted to downplay it as much as possible, so the words are that, but like the delivery is, everything is very like calm and measured, and almost no, it's the police chief guy, like his guys have been killed, and he's basically go off, find this woman, make her pay.
Yeah.
And but it's thinking about like, well, how do you take this dialogue and make it different the way this character is delivering it versus how these other characters would deliver it, but also balloon placement, balloon shape, like figuring out is this two bubbles that are joined, is it two separate ones, is it one block of text, does the text have some walk to it, like if somebody wakes up, if somebody's drunk, etc., like is the balloon shape funny? If they're mad, does it have icicles on the bottom? Like I feel like you can do that stuff without it veering into the silly, and I think it gives you so much additional ammunition to convey narratively what you want to convey, because we don't have as many tools as, say, somebody making a movie or things along those lines. Like we can't control the pacing, we can't control we can try to control the pacing, but we can't control music, we can't, so we have to take advantage of the things that we can do that others can't, I think, and I think lettering is one of them.
Well, comic books is, I would say, predominantly considered a visual artistic medium, or an illustrative medium, maybe, if we use that term. The lettering, I would say the layout and the lettering are really the huge chunks of graphic design that you can employ into comic books, which, because illustration typically doesn't really live in the graphic design world, it's a tool that can be used in graphic design, but it's not a core element of it.
Yeah.
But the usage of lettering and letter forms and how you create these things, the balloons are a design element, and how you put those into play gives you, like you said, this other tool, which, might not be expressed at the full level by a lot of people.
Yeah. And I think, and I think in addition to being, a narrative element, it's also, and one of the reasons why I like to letter on the page is for me, the balloon is a compositional element. Like, it affects very much all of the aspects of the drawing around it. Like, not just what you don't have to draw. I know I mentioned that earlier from a time saving standpoint, but it also, like, it creates something that you can frame. Like, I also, have one of the things that I'm real particular about is how balloons operate as, I guess, for lack of a better word, planar objects in relation to the characters. Like, if you have a multiple plane composition, which I like to employ if I can, to try and create an immersive space for the, the characters and that sense of immersion for the audience. That also, especially when you're in the woods or in a jail cell or things like that, like, it creates formal obstacles because I don't want anything that is on a plane nearer to the audience than is the character. That character should not have a balloon that transverses that plane. Like,
right.
I'm also doing things that hopefully aren't distracting, but if there is a tree in front of this character who's speaking, spatially that balloon might need to be partially obscured by that tree.
Totally.
Not in a way that doesn't obscure the text, unless I want the sense that the trees are somehow obscuring the sound. And sometimes you do want that, like, if you have, and so again, it's just playing with the formal elements of how do you depict sound visually? How do you depict spatial things clearly when those spatial things are non-literal?
Yeah.
I think trying to treat them as literally as possible is the way that I usually like to approach it.
Because every single piece is a domino that you are setting up to trigger the next thing. So if you have this obscured piece of dialogue behind a tree, well, you might be setting up some confusion for the character in the foreground. Go, wait, what was that? And then next thing you know, there's a crack, and then all of a sudden the bowstring gets let out. And, all these things happen, and it wouldn't happen if you saw that thing. In theory, if the protagonist heard what the person was saying clearly, and they could. You're setting things up, and once again, you're using the tools in your toolbox to play with that. I sat and sketched out a couple of layouts for creator of this book because I just wanted them to try to think different things. And it's like all this kind of like, it's just figure out what your tools are. Here your Lego, make these things, keep making, how do you keep telling this and keep it interesting and fun by moving the shapes around?
Yeah.
So it's interesting because I went from sort of this very sort of, I would call comic book approach to making comic books from an artist point of view early on, which was I'll draw my layouts and draw my story that way and figure out what happens. And then I sort of moved into, by default, by having to try to sell stories to publishers, having to put them on paper. And that sort of became a bullet list to an outline to somewhat of a script. I wouldn't have called my early works scripts too much.
Yeah.
But now I approach it, and it's purely from the written word. Like, I sit down and I write out everything I need to write out. I don't even think about, yes, the layouts are popping in my head, and that's how I can see it in my head, and I can kind of devise how many panels it'll take, but I don't sit and scribble out any drawings to kind of solve that problem. But I never, ever, ever sat down and like kind of drew balloons entirely and lettered things to figure things out. I would just, like I said, sketch it out. So what's your weekly and daily, I guess, studio practice when a new project kind of comes into play for you? So, like, let's say, using Outlaws as an example, the idea pushes itself forward enough to where you're like, okay, I can't keep this back anymore. I need to do this. You've done all those sort of like, this makes sense for our lives analogy. And now we're at go time. So what is the weekly and daily process for you?
It really, honestly, it changes week to week. Right now I'm in I call it the writing stage, but basically that also means thumbnailing. So I have my fairly loose outline. Like, I know general beats, like where the story's going to go, but that can change a bit. I know what I want to include. I think I know the order in which those things are going to happen. But generally speaking, I try to allow each scene to kind of dictate what's going to be in it. And I just think about, well, what information do I have to get across at this stage? Like, what are either the character things that are important that I'm setting up for later? What are the plot things that are important that I'm setting up for later? That, you know, because you want those final scenes to have a sense of catharsis and emotional payoff, and so you do need to have that set up. But there's also finding things in that moment that will suggest stuff later that you're not necessarily planning. And that's the real fun part for me.
Mm-hmm.
But at this stage, basically, I'll go in and I'll sit and I will sort of work things out. This is also an unusual project in that it's longer. It's going to be part of a series. I'm doing more thinking about, you know, for lack of a better term, the world building, because it's going to be consequential with each successive thing. And it also, you know, this is the first fantasy story that I've done, and generally speaking, most of what I've done has been historical fiction. And so as long as I contextualize that history for the audience, I am able to just default to that. And I've done my research and it's fine. But here, I still want to approach things through that lens of these little day-to-day things are consequential because they are in our real life. You know, everything that it's not just that you go out and, you know, if you look at medieval stuff, like there's a lot of lawsuits, for example. Like most of what we know about, not most, but a lot of what we know about daily life for non-royal folks.
Did you listen to that Freakonomics episode?
I didn't.
Okay, so
but is it about that? I guess
a few weeks ago they did a whole thing on aging. So they did the sort of the 3 phases of aging in life. You know, young, middle-aged, and elderly. Listen to the middle-aged one because they really kind of went out of their lane and did life as a middle-aged person in the Middle Ages.
Oh, fun.
I can't, like, for you, you're going to get a ton out of this because,
oh yeah,
yes, lawsuits, very popular.
Yeah, but I think that in addition to that being a thing, and I think that, you know, that's something that's like that, what are the immediate ramifications of each action outside of the fact that I hit you, now you're going to hit me back? Like, how does that influence everything else that's happening? I feel like that's kind of needed. I'm able to think about that through the historical lens pretty easily. For this, I have to lay out, like, well, how does local government work? How does this thing? Because when somebody does something, I need to be able to think about, well, what are the immediate ramifications of this going to be? Are the local townspeople going to be on their side for this? Are they going to be mad that all of a sudden, oh no, now they're not going to be able to use the canal? Like, well, you know, whatever it might be.
Sure.
I think that, like, that adds a degree of verisimilitude to the story. So with this one, I did a lot of that in advance, like just kind of like writing out what things are going to be. And sometimes, like, as I go along, I'll realize that there is a blank spot in something that I know. So sometimes I'll go back and hit my Word document, like, with what those things are. But that's sort of the movie writer backstory stuff that I generally tend to avoid.
Mm-hmm.
I also did a little exercise for myself that I thought was really helpful for me, finding the voices of the characters and the personality of the characters, because all the characters are you to some degree or another, and or at least they are for me. And so you're trying to find what to bring out of these different things are. But something that I found to be really helpful for my 2 leads, because I couldn't necessarily get a beat on them, I wrote, and you're never going to see these, they're never going to be in the book, but I wrote a little monologue for each about what they think the shortcomings of their partner are, rather than somebody saying like, why is it hard to work with this person?
Right.
And once I found, because, you know, I work with Kyle Starks occasionally, and, you know, we have a list a mile long of why it's hard to work with.
Kyle's a sweetheart. Come on.
He is a sweetheart. I know. And so I think that can be like, that doesn't mean that there's not, affection and camaraderie and things along those lines with these characters, but I think that it makes it easier if I know what would bug the other character about them, then that makes it easier to create interpage conflict. It makes it easier to figure out like where the strengths of the narrative are. Like one of the things that the kid character does that I do is look at all problems as systemic
Mm-hmm.
and try to solve them systemically, which is not great if you're,
In the
getting
moment,
faced
it's
by somebody.
always easy.
Yeah, and so thinking about things through this larger lens can be really helpful when you're trying to make these plans that are going to help, in the long run, but they also can create more immediate problems. And so, so there's things along those lines that I don't think I would have found had I done that. But usually I'm sitting and I'm working through each stage at a time. And so I'll go through and do my outlining stage tends to be fairly quick. I'll go through, I'll do changes, I keep going back in. I edit as I go, and so rather than do one draft and be done with it, like I will, usually about once a week, read through everything that I have so far, go through, change what needs changing, and so by the time I'm done, there may still be edits. I'll pass it on to my wife, I'll pass it on to my mom, I'll pass it on to a couple of friends, they'll give me some feedback. This one I might pass it on to more people than I have in the past, just because I'm spending a lot of time on it, I'm investing a lot of myself into it financially, and so I want to make sure that it's as good as possible. And I try to recognize that what I think is as good as possible isn't necessarily as good as possible. Speaking of Kyle, one of the things that's really helpful with him is that he hates everything that I do. He likes how I do it, and I think, and I don't want that to sound like flip. Like he does like he likes the drawing, he likes the method of execution. He thinks that my choice of subject matter is such a departure from what he likes.
Mm-hmm.
Any bit of world building that I indulge in, etc., like it just makes him so mad. And so if I can find, so he's a great resource, because if I can find something that I'm still happy with indulging in these little side moments, but also it doesn't bug him. Like I don't always listen to everything that he says about the work, but I do, or let me rephrase, I don't always adjust everything that he says about the work, but I do listen to it and I do look at it and I think, is this wholly indulgent on my part? Is there a way to make this part more accessible without losing the flavor that I want it to have? So I'll do all this stuff. I'll send it off. I'll get it. I'll edit it and I'll get it essentially locked in, and I'll be ready to move to pencils and ink. So then I'll go through and I'll tighten my pencils and ink it, usually same day. And I'll try to get as many pages done that way as possible. The tightening pencils part usually takes a while. The inking is usually pretty quick.
Okay.
Once all of that is done, once it's all done and inked, then I will start coloring it. So I do each stage sort of as I go. And once I color, in this instance, so for the coloring, what I'll do is I color everything digitally. If it's for publication, like if I'm doing commissions, if I'm doing things for the wooden stuff, things along those lines, I'll work in watercolor, but I don't have enough control over watercolor to do thematic coloring.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that I do watercolor tends to be pretty literal. Skin is skin color, and sometimes in the book, for this particular skin needs to be blue, or it needs to be yellow, or it needs to be, like I'll lean into these more art directy palettes, because I want, as you flip through a book, I want you to be able to see the colors, and if you've read it, you know which scene is which.
Right.
And so I will give it to my wife, Liz, and so what she will do, I'll give her a sort of simplified character palette of each of the main characters, and she will go in and flat all of, unless it's a nighttime scene or something, and I'm like, I know everything's just going to be shades of red or whatever, she will flat all of the main characters.
Wow.
And so not all of the details, so like the skin will just be skin. If there's a different color for the nose and for the eyes and stubble, I'll go in and add that because that's part of the drawing. But because I don't necessarily differentiate where my eyes start and end, and so that kind of stuff I will mostly do myself. But she will do all of the base colors for all the different parts of their clothing and everything else, and that saves me a huge amount of time because yeah.
She's a keeper, flat out.
Oh, absolutely. And she can do more than that, but she likes to color everything locally. So sometimes if there's something, I might give her a page that has more things on, like what does the background of this look like? A lot of this is going to be woods and stuff, so probably that's not going to be the case. But she'll go through, like, for one of the 6 sidekicks issues, they fight a bunch of stuntmen, and all of the stuntmen are wearing these orange jumpsuits, and that was strictly a logistical decision because partially it made it easier to tell who was who, but also it made it easier to color because I was just like, can you get, color everybody orange?
Right.
And we're set. So once I have that, I'll go in and color everything. And historically, I will color the entire book before anybody sees anything. But I'm going to be serializing this online. And so what I will probably do is color it scene by scene and start releasing it as soon as the colors are done. Because at that point, it will have already been edited. It will be ready to go. And I can just pop them up as I go. So my hope is to start releasing this in January.
Okay.
Which may be ambitious schedule-wise, but I'm fairly confident that it's doable.
Okay.
I just wrapped up the last of my 4 other people projects last week, so now I have a pretty open calendar for the next few months.
Okay, so that actually, I wrote a note down earlier about the publishing plan for this.
Mm-hmm.
What were your factors in determining how you wanted this and how you want this to be viewed in the world?
Well, originally I had planned on, I was planning on doing this the same way I've done with every other project, which is to work with a publisher. I gave it to my agent and he put together a pitch, and we were talking with one publisher. This is on the book market side of things. The editor in question is somebody who I have not worked with professionally, but have wanted to for a long time. Like, I admire this person a great deal. And there was a stretch where, and pitch stuff takes a while, it goes back and forth, but there was a stretch where there was some stuff happening internally at this publisher, unrelated to the editor, that I thought probably meant that acquisitions were not going to happen for a while.
Okay.
And so I started thinking, well, what are my alternatives? Do I want to do another project, or do I want to do this? Do I want to try and reshape it to be more friendly to a different market? And I started thinking about how much or what I would do if I were doing it myself. And it was very different in terms of format, in terms of execution, than what I would have done with a publisher. And I started getting really excited about those format things and what I was thinking of as really taking advantage of the moment, assuming, I guess, that, our economics are still going to be in place in the way that they are next year, that they are now. But, you can't not assume that and hope to get anything done. So, but I think that one of those things is I wanted to work small but long. I think one of the real difficulties, anyway, so I'll get into that in a second, but I started making a plan for myself as to how I'd approach this. And then the publisher came back and we're like, all right, we're here's what we need. And I was suddenly faced with this situation where I did have an opportunity to do this book through traditional channels, but I was getting very excited about what I could do without that. And so I talked to the editor about what I wanted to do structurally, and that said it's not something that we are able to do, which is certainly understandable, and that's fine. But and I felt really I wrestled with it for a really long time, partially financially. We are no longer a single income household. We were for about a dozen years, but my wife has a part-time job doing what she used to volunteer to do, which is the marketing community engagement for a local performing arts center. And so, but it's not finances that we can live on, and so it's definitely a boon. I don't want to downplay it, but historically we live on comics income. And so not having an advance, not actually having comics income for the amount of time that it'll take to do this book is a key factor in the ability to do it. So that was the thing. There's also, like I said, I really like this editor. I didn't want to leave that person in a lurch by having them run things up the ladder and get an offer put together and then be like, actually, I don't want to do this. So it felt really bad about.
Don't burn that bridge too quick.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And we're on good terms about it. Everything is fine. But I really did a big pros and cons list. We talked about it at length. I traveled to St. Louis and talked to a couple of my cartoonist buddies who live there at length about it, like just trying to decide whether or not this was the avenue. And eventually I decided I want to put it out myself. Part of that is viable because I did a little sketchbook on Kickstarter, and I was able to see logistically how doing all of that stuff works, getting a book printed, getting it out. And it was a lot less daunting than I thought before. And a lot of the stuff that I would want to do in terms of release, like I'm going to have agency over that. And I'm very excited about that agency, and the business side of things that used to be very daunting to me is less so now.
Yeah.
This is shade on every publisher, and it may not be in the one that I was talking to, but everybody else that I've worked with, I have been largely unhappy with how a lot of release stuff is handled and marketing stuff, excepting my first book, which I thought was handled very well. Although it had its own issues as well. And so I look forward to being in control of the design and the marketing and the sales and all of the rest of it, because I think that I will be able to shape it to the project in a way that a publisher who has a lot of projects that they're having to juggle probably does not have the resources to do the way that I want to see it done. That was the decision to do the self-publishing. What I want to do with it is that I have seen, a lot of stuff that is serialized on webtoons and tapas and things along those lines that is phone readable, which I think the scrolling method of comics reading is fantastic. My daughter is 15, and most of the comics that she reads are on webtoons, and I think that's the case for a lot of teens. I really like physical books. I think that physical books are, of course, where the financial aspect of that is, unless you're willing to sign over a lot of stuff that I'm not willing to do to work as an exclusive with one of these web platforms. But I think that a lot of times those books or the serialized stuff do not lend themselves well to being adapted to print. I think that there's a lot of times a clunkiness in readability and page layout and things along those lines when you take these disparate panels that are done independently and try to assemble them on a page. I also think that trying to do them on a page first and then breaking them up into panels can also be equally disastrous in that unless you're digitally lettering and allowing your balloons to be really big on this thing and then you're changing it for print, you can't do a splash page. You can't do, there's a lot of stuff that you don't want anybody to ever have to zoom in. So my thought for it is, what if each page is roughly the size of a phone screen and you print it small? And so I decided that I wanted to print it mass market paperback size. Partially because I absolutely love that format. It's easy to carry around. You can put it in a pocket. You can put it in a bag. Everybody moving to 6x9 for book market stuff, I think, has been, it just makes the act of reading physically clunky in a way that it doesn't have to be, especially if you're on the go. And so I think that doing each page to where it can read on a phone screen, and I'll break up panels individually for the reading, but if I have a splash page, then it will fit on the phone and it will be the page and you can read the text at size. I don't have to rework it. And that to me is really exciting. What it means, though, is that the book is going to be absurdly long. So it will be, if I'm estimating right, and I do tend to estimate right, it's going to be right around 515 pages.
Yeah, wow.
But for a mass market paperback, people are used to carrying around
Sure.
a 515 page mass market paperback. So I don't think physically it will be all that much. There's, there are some shelving issues with it. It is thick enough that the spine is really going to pop out, which is great, but it is narrow enough that if it's sitting on a shelf with a bunch of 6x9s, is it going to be pushed back, and are you going to lose it in the stacks? So it's like, there's a lot of these logistical things that are balances that you have trades for one or the other.
Sure. So there's a couple of things that I just tie into sort of traditional publishing, which I guess we can circle on a couple of those things. One thing you brought up.
I talked a lot without giving you a chance to
No, it's okay.
I'm sorry.
Totally fine. So you were talking about like a bit of the woes after the first book being handled by a publisher, and what that usually is in traditional publishing, your first book, your debut book, is when you get all the attention. That you get everything from the publisher that they can afford to put to you based on whatever the deal is. So if it's a $50,000 deal, a $10,000 deal, a $300,000 deal, you're going to get the attention that sum of money that they're kept writing a check for over a period of time deserves. The subsequent books, unless you immediately hit the front list and you are the person, the return of attention does not exist. They just you're left out to sea, so to speak, and you're sort of given the automatic solutions where they're like, well, we're going to do social media posts, like that's what you're going to hear, and it's and I understand it. Like, it's not everybody gets the same sort of toys to play with.
And please, like, I don't begrudge anybody.
No, that's not what it sounds like.
Resources are finite.
It's
just, I think that, but one of the difficulties is that there's only so much that I as an author can do working with a publisher to promote the book, whereas if I have control over that book, I can send out galleys, I can reach, like, there's a lot of stuff that I can't do to promote my own book when I'm working with a publisher that I will be able to if I'm by myself.
So ARCs make all the difference. If you can get advanced reader copies out to the people who write about the stuff that you're making, to the people who read the stuff that you're making, that's how you make the contacts of the people who've never heard of you. The other thing was, you were talking about the form of your book, and this, I guess if I could say a theme for this season, it's going to be containers. The how the container defines the work. And we were talking about like the 20 page container for a regular traditional floppy, the various kinds of things. We're talking about genre, the containers that the genre creates in the mindset of people. You were talking about the actual shape of the book. Publishing doesn't come down to what the publisher wants to do, what the writers and artists want to make. It comes down to what shelf space is available around the world. If you look at it from that point of view, you can't really begrudge everybody in the line of saying like, well, you're not treating me well. It's like, there's just not enough shelf space for the stuff. And they have to make these hard choices. But like with your book, I worked at Barnes & Noble a long time ago. The solution is not the spine. Even though you have a nice big spine, it'll have a big logo on it. They just turn those books sideways and face them out. So that way you get a cover view versus a spine view, because you're a different shape. You're smaller and narrower than the rest. And it's a great solution for like, sort of, how do we get as many books on this shelf as possible? We'll turn the skinny one sideways. Done. I guess narrow. It's not skinny, it's narrow. To think about this stuff ahead and to be able to highlight these form factors and features to a publisher, they're like, great, this is a selling point that our sales force can go, hey, this is, we know we crank out all these 6x9s, but here's another solution that's going to be able to be higher visibility, lower width count on the shelves, and they're going to go, we love this. This is
except nobody liked that. Like, I think partially because there's been such a move to get away from mass market for 20 years that they effectively don't exist anymore outside of, like, I mean, they do, but it's like the gas station market,
Yeah,
it's,
right.
and I don't think that's bad, but I also think there's a, to me, and I, whether or not this will actually have any sway whatsoever, but this is a fantasy book. And a lot of people who read fantasy or read fantasy started off reading mass market paperbacks.
Totally.
And I think there is the possibility that this may have a vinyl component to it, that people will see it as a nostalgic format that suits the contents and will like that part of it. Now, will that actually move the needle so far as sales goes? I have no idea, but it might. And I do think that it is a format that is ripe for revisiting.
Sure.
And I don't know, outside of, like, I mentioned it to some friends really like the idea. Some are like, what is this? A family circus collection? Like, there's not really, like, there isn't a big precedent for this particular format in comics. There could be.
Well, we didn't know we liked it. We didn't know we liked The Matrix until it came out. Like, I mean, like,
yeah, exactly.
It's never the responsibility of a publisher to determine what the market wants.
Yeah.
It's only for them to index what the market has already purchased.
Yeah.
If they're banking, okay, well, the percentages are here, this, that, and the other thing. And I totally get it.
Yeah.
Let's say, for argument's sake, your book jacket design harkens back to the classic fantasy mass market books that many people of a certain age bought and read. Well, right there, you're going to connect to that market in a way that wouldn't look the same way if it was just a 6x9 version.
Yeah.
If you pay attention to what's out there. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or what's not even out there.
Yeah. And that's the hope. And, whether it does or not remains to be seen. But I think that I do really like, I like the physicality of that particular object, but I also think that it's going to lend itself really well towards cross-platform publishing in a way that, the digital and because I think I am an outlier in that I read most stuff that I read on a desktop if I'm reading it digitally. And I think that most people, especially the younger folks, are reading it on their phones. And so I think making it phone readable is going to be really important for reaching the audience that I would like to reach.
Yeah.
Which is a mixed audience. And that's another thing that I think is kind of hard, is who is this book for? And ideally it's for anybody who loves swashbucklers. But when I'm reaching out to stores, I'm going to sell it as YA. It's a teen protagonist. They're learning how to fight, how to survive, etc. There's stuff that does that, but it's also, if you like adventure comics and you like the type of stuff that I draw, hopefully adults will read it. Historically, even when I'm doing kids stuff, with the exception of the Creeps books, I thought of the Krogan series that I did, which was historical fiction, as for kids. And 10% of the readers were kids. It was almost all adults. And that's great. That's fine. That may be the case with this one, but I want to make it accessible and available to younger readers who might want to read it then. And I think that's the way to do so, is to present it to them digitally.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's no surprise that the music industry, after 1982, made all their efforts and put all their money into making music videos. I mean, that's how people were getting music, into their head. And hopefully then they would go and buy the actual physical media. You just need to pay attention. Like, when you're making things, pay attention to how these things actually live in the world, and then don't have to copy, but you can anticipate, you can create, and use your abilities to your best advantage. Going back to the Word document, is that where you are starting? Are you starting in a sketchbook? You're starting in a Word document?
I usually start with character drawings. Like, I tend to build everything around some character drawings. And so for this one, I am a big fan of, the True Grit dynamic, grizzled
the veteran
fighter and kid who needs protection. And I think one of the things that I kind of, and so I started with these drawings, and one of the things that I really wanted to shift from with this, and actually saying shift from after mentioning True Grit, because this is pretty much exactly True Grit, but everything else is different. Like usually the grizzled fighter is the serious one and the kid is the frivolous one.
Yeah.
Not the case in True Grit. In True Grit, the kid is the serious one and the other one's the buffoon. And that's kind of what I wanted to do with this.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I think I like the idea of a character who, like, they're the real hard-nosed killers, and I like the idea of a person who is a successful killer because they've never felt the need to weigh the ramifications of their work and are happy-go-lucky with it, as opposed to hardened by it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that was part. So I'll start with that. So I had these characters for a while before I knew what I wanted the story to be, and part of what made it doable was realizing that I could make it very specifically what I care about, for lack of a better word, ethically. Like what are the things that matter to me?
Mm-hmm.
And it is fairness is a big part of it. And I think the ways that supersede legality, like that there can be legal means put into place and they do not apply uniformly. And I think, that's a part of that fairness too. And that sense of what happens when you become aware of how law is applied unequally.
Yeah.
When it is supposed to be neutral.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a big part. So once I kind of realized that could be kind of the structural foundation, a lot of the other stuff came into play. And there's things that I look to for the types of stories that I like. It's less in this first book and more in the second arc, which is like Kentucky labor history and Matawan and some of those types of things are going to come into play. And I'm like, how would these labor disputes have worked if the miners had a samurai?
Sure.
And sort of playing with these kind of things.
I missed that Kurosawa movie.
Yeah. So I think like that kind of stuff is really fun. And also, the other big thing, and it hasn't come up yet in the part that you've read, but essentially the conceit of the series is what made me excited to do it, which was, and again, this goes back to the lawsuits. This idea that so much of the human condition is this going to cost me money? I had a thought that there's these unequal laws that have been concocted, and one of them is that there were some tax wardens who were trying to go after some of these knights for not paying what they're supposed to, and so they tried to get their accountants to turn state's evidence. And so the idea would be that now there is a law that basically says you have to give an employer 3 days notice if there is an interjurisdictional arresting body that's going to arrest one of your employees.
Right.
And if you don't, then you are required to pay essentially 2 years of your salary to this person. And it's there so that these bigwigs can kill their accountants before they get taken in for questioning.
Yeah.
But this kid who basically, before deciding he wanted to be an artist, was in school to do like law stuff. His parents were lawyers. Knows this and is like, wait, if we are on the run, we can just take essentially any job that we can find. In doing so, we buy ourselves 3 days, because if the police kill us or arrest us, then they owe our employer money and they don't want to pay our employer money. So that buys us 3 days, and they can hopscotch around the country taking on these odd jobs. And then basically it turns into Have Gun Will Travel or Leverage or The Incredible Hulk or whatever, where it becomes a problem of the week type of deal, where they are taking on these increasingly dangerous jobs or morally dubious jobs or whatever it might be in order to just keep from getting arrested. And that's kind of their window, while this noir detective Elliot Stabler character
hunts them down,
is just waiting in the wings for them to mess up. And so like once I kind of had that conceit, I got really excited, because that meant I could do all of these different types of stories. And this one might be a mystery. This one might
Mm-hmm.
be a straight action. This one could be something with bobsleds. Like, it doesn't matter,
Yeah.
and it gives me, I really like creating these frameworks to do these different subgenres within the framework of a genre.
I love that.
So that was a big part of it. So it kind of stemmed from that. And once I cracked that, then I sat down and started writing, like, well, what are some of these different adventures and stories that I want to do? How do these characters interrelate? And so it kind of it springs up both visually and in text. So usually I'll do some basic drawings first, and then I will start writing.
That's cool. I mean, it's no different. I mean, you come up with the idea of the character most often. Like, this character will kind of like present themselves in your mind and just keep tapping you on the shoulder until you pay them a little more attention and a little more attention. And then they start showing you things that they're capable of doing in these little mental fantasies, and then you went into the process of, sort of writing this couples therapy approach to the characters to put these personality types, these character flaws and character traits in your conscious mind as you create these characters in the narrative. And I think that's a really cool approach. I love that.
And it's not so much, and yeah, those little monologue things, the couples thing, it's less flaws and more sources of conflict, I should say, because it's not that either person is wrong with how they approach their day-to-day things or their problem solving or whatever it might be. It's just that it runs counter to the way the other person wants to do it. And I think that figuring out what those conflicts are without it just being like, well, I'm patient and I'm grouchy, like a lot of times we tend to default to traits to create those conflicts as opposed to approaches to things. And I think that the main source of conflict that I have with anybody these days is just differences in working method. And I think so, like, having two people who are on the run and how are they wanting to escape these cops that are chasing them, like, that becomes the source of the conflict. Like, that has worked really well for me so far.
Right. A unified goal, but different methods.
Yeah.
Is that not the A-team right there we're discussing? I don't know.
Yeah, pretty much.
You were just going back on the idea of the law and sort of how it's managed, that really does kind of center on the key theme of the new Superman film. But rather than make it the driving force maybe of the protagonist and the sort of the story framework that you're utilizing over and over again, it's what drove the villain in the story to action, which the only reason we have the story is because the villain has said, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And much like your story, the villain has made an action. The protagonist stumble into the action foolishly.
Yeah.
Or heroically, or, righteously, whatever you want.
Again, I think it depends on your point of view. Like, for one, it's heroically, for the other, it's foolishly. So,
yeah. And so, like, but it's only, we have actions of heroes basically because the villains are dictating the sort of the battlefield by seeding it however they will, and not in the terms of intended conflict. Often it's just, this is what I see needs to be done. And then the air quote hero goes, wait a minute. No, and that's when we have our story. Okay. So since you're going on your own as the sort of the publisher, how are you handling edits in this situation?
What I have historically done is both my wife and my mom are really good detail catchers. So they will go through and they'll catch any typos, they'll catch any visual continuity mistakes, things like that. I tend to self-edit pretty ruthlessly, so I'll go through and, once as I go, I'll be making changes. Once the book is done, I'll be making changes. The pages that you read, I think probably the first half of them have been really heavily edited, and the second half have not. And so there's probably stuff that will be cut or reworked in those later pages. I'll pass it on to a couple of friends. It's tricky. There are I'm friends with a lot of editors. I might hire a freelance editor, but I don't know who is the tricky part. There are people that I've worked with before, but a lot of times the folks with whom I've worked that I have liked their editorial stuff, like a lot of it was early stage discussion and not adjustment to the work. So I'm not really sure exactly how best to pursue that and who would be best suited to this particular book, because this is different than the books that I've worked with other people on in the past. I am not entirely sure.
Okay.
There are a couple of people that are potentially on my list of potential editor hires that I've worked with before on various book publishing things. Probably it's going to end up being mostly sending it to friends and getting feedback.
Yeah.
For this one. And that may change going forward with future books. You know, a lot of times in situations like that, I tend to lead a very whimsical life in the sense that I am dictated by whim. And usually when an editor is needed, it will present itself. You know, who the editor is and what needs editing. And so I just try to keep my mind and ears open for that when it happens.
I think that's great. It's very hard when a project's further down the road. It's very hard from an editorial eye because it's really tough to say something, because if you understand the hard work that has to go into making changes to existing comic book artwork and pages, it's very tough. So I think the deftness that it takes and the sensitivity to figure out what the lightest touches you can make to make the largest amount of difference is where it comes into play in that sense.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I know. I get it. I totally get it. And you know, listen, you're betting on yourself this time, like more so than other things. You know, I mean, you bet on yourself for all your talents, but if somebody's writing the check, it's a very different engagement.
Well, yeah, at that point, it falls to them to sell the book, and you hope that it will, and you try to promote it, but it doesn't matter as much if it sells. And so here it matters, because if it doesn't, you know, we're in trouble.
Yeah, that's the case. I mean, I think this is not a thought process 25 years ago. So
no, and
it's great.
Yeah, and you know, part of it is just the viability of how crowdfunding stuff works. Part of it is accessibility of printers. There's the printer that I worked with on the Sword book. I'm very happy with for this. And you know, I talked to their sales rep, who's my point of contact, about these are the dimensions that I'm thinking. Is there anything close to this that is going to give me a price break? And she was like, well, if you make it 2 centimeters taller and 4 centimeters narrower, it'll cut your costs substantially, because we can put 48 pages to a sheet. And I'm like, well, there you go. That's my dimensions now. But that's the kind of thing that I'm trying to do as much upfront with as possible. Like I know how much, at least right now, my books are going to cost at 513 pages. I know how many I can get. I know where I'm going to keep them. I know what, you know. So like I'm trying to be as businessy as possible on the business side of things, while also being as artsy as possible on the artsy side of things. And the two are not necessarily influencing each other, but the art is suggesting business things that I can do. Like I'll do this and I'll be like, oh, that's something I can make this thing and sell it as a bonus bump in the Kickstarter that otherwise might not be there. So just, but again, having that agency to make those considerations is making it much more exciting to me and giving me a lot of ideas that I know that should I decide to want to try to execute them, I'll be able to on the selling side, and that's exciting.
Yeah, well, the I guess the Kickstarter model, using that as just the Kleenex term, is that it's an a la carte way to build out a book.
Yeah,
you know, interest dictates how many spot varnishes you get.
Yeah, well, something that I did with the Sword book that I'm going to try to do differently with this is I am not actually going. There will be stretch goals, and there will be a lot of stretch goals, but they will not actually affect the book itself very much outside of a foil for the title. And that is because this is going to be the first in what I hope is a series of a few books. And I want those books to have a uniformity to them. And if once I do something for the first book, I've got to do
You're stuck. You're locked in.
And also that unless I have all those things planned out, like I'm not going to add stuff to the back of the book or things like that, because I want to be able to put the book to press the second the Kickstarter is over, rather than do what I did with the sword book, which is have these additional things that I'm going to add and push it back by a month or two.
Sure.
But I think that it will allow for a lot of the extra stuff that I think is fun. Like, will it come with a little sketchbook that has all the behind the scenes stuff? Will there be an annotated version? A couple of things that I'm thinking about for the Kickstarter is one, which would be pretty high up as stretch goals go, would be to make a copy available to every public middle school in Kentucky.
Wow. Yeah.
One would be to record an audiobook version, which is not a full cast, like not a dramatization, but to rewrite in, I assume, present tense prose, essentially what's happening in the panels, and allow the dialogue to move most of the story along. But to have that available so the narrative can exist for folks who are, visually impaired, or who might just not be a big comics fan, but like audiobooks or things along those lines. And I've got a buddy who's a regular audiobook narrator that I plan to do it myself, but I'm going to talk to him about who to work with in Nashville is my closest city, and he used to live there and do a lot of recording there. Like, who are some audiobook producers that I could work with? And so that would be a stretch goal, and everybody who backs the Kickstarter also gets the audiobook if it reaches that. But it's okay for that to take an extra 6 months as long as the book is in press right away, if that makes sense. But I think that could be fun. And so there's other things that I think are doable with stretch goals that are not about changing the physical object of the book itself. And those to me are very exciting, because I think that creates an additional avenue to reach more readers and to give, process stuff to the readers who like it. And, there are non-comics makers who love process stuff. All the comics makers love process stuff.
Sure.
So and it's great for, younger folks who might want to be moving into art or in any kind of forms, because, I don't make movies, but that doesn't mean that DVD commentaries when I was in high school or college, I guess, weren't a hugely influential and beneficial avenue for learning about the craft of storytelling.
Oh, yeah.
And so, somebody might be in any number of fields, but they might find a behind the scenes, PDF of comics making to be beneficial to them.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, we are fortunate to be in a time where these tools and mediums are so prevalent and only getting better.
Yeah.
To learn, to be an autodidact of some sort in this respect. I think it's kind of a golden age. So I guess, to do my due diligence and being a great supporter of your effort, what can people go and buy that will put money in your family's coffers to offset this whole thing?
So right now, Outlaw isn't there. I will be serializing it, like I said, on Webtoons and that sort of thing. But also, I'll be doing it on my Patreon a week early, whenever that is the case, starting in January. If you just look up my name in Patreon, it will come up.
It'll be in the description.
Oh, thank you very much. So if you're wanting to follow Outlaw's Apprentice, I post behind the scenes stuff as much as I feel I can without being too spoiler heavy as I go. I also have prints and original art and other books for sale. Not my comics work that you can find through your local comic shop or bookstore, but I have art books. So I have a recent one that I did called A Dream of Swords, which was a collection of drawings of swords that I did
so cool.
At different museums around the world. Thank you very much. I was real happy with how that one turned out. And, other sketchbooks, things along those lines. Those are the main ways, is just ordering stuff from my shop. And also, once Outlaws, so the book, I keep saying Outlaw, it's Outlaw's Apprentice is the name of the book or the comic. Once that comes out, any rooftop shouting is appreciated. My big thing, especially with the first book in a series or first arc in a series, is to get as many eyeballs on it as possible. So if you are on Webtoons or Top, I don't know how the Tapa's, for lack of a better word, self-publishing avenue works. But, if you'll subscribe to it, that'll be great.
Right on. I think we've talked a lot, it's funny we've talked really around one subject the whole time versus we talked in depth about one subject, but usually I'm
Yeah.
all over the place. But I actually really I found this kind of a fascinating discussion to kind of get into the weeds with this one. Are you locked down for the rest of the year working? Are you going to be at conventions? Like, do you have
Pretty
anything?
much. So I do fairly few conventions historically. I do Heroes Con, Dragon Con, New York Comic Con, and Chicago Comic Con. And if Chicago and my local show, which is Lexington Comic Con in Kentucky, aren't the same weekend, which they are this upcoming year, I'll do Lexington as well. So it's not very many. I only do 4 or 5 per year. That's going to change next year once I have the book in hand. I'm going to be going to, I think, probably more book festivals than comic
Sure.
shows, because I feel like comic shows are where I make more money, and so it's better immediate things. But I feel like trying to reach outside my existing market is going to be important for the long-term success of this endeavor. And so going to those, I'm hoping to do more of those starting next year.
I
So
wonder where World Fantasy is next year, because might be a good one for you to do hand sales.
I have not actually looked at any fantasy specific
Yeah, World
conventions.
Fantasy might be good for you because I've done SIFWA, and they talk a lot about graphic novels. So there's a lot of
Yeah.
authors there who love the graphic novel format because they love comics.
Yeah, well, and it's worth looking at, and it's also anytime I'm at those sorts of things, one of the plus sides of doing book festivals versus doing comic shows, especially if you're trying to promote a book, is that there is a lot of interest in graphic novels and not necessarily as many folks going out to those shows. So it's easier to get on panels where you can spotlight your work
Yep.
than I think it sometimes is for prose authors, and so that's a benefit, because they might have a graphic novel specific panel and you're one of the 3 people who are there shilling graphic novels. So or they're wanting to vary up the type of talent that's there, and so you have one franchise person, 2
Yep.
original people, and a graphic novelist. So that also allows for more. I used to do a lot more book promotion when I did Krogan's and the Creeps. I skipped all over the place pushing those, and it was great, and it was a wonderful experience, and it's something I look forward to doing again.
Yeah.
I got out of the habit of it because one of the other things I'm really excited about self-publishing is it became such a headache to get physical copies of my own books from the publishers, either logistically or financially or both, that I just stopped bringing them to shows, and I just steer people towards stores that I knew had them, or booths that I knew had them. And I love the idea of being able to have a book that I worked on again,
Sure.
and hand selling that at each show, because it's something that I'm going to be, I'm proud of it so far. I have no reason to think I won't be when it's done, and I really look forward to putting it in people's hands and getting them as excited about it as I am.
That's awesome. All right, just 2 things to fill your head up here. We didn't talk about it. The action in Outlaw's Apprentice is great. Your choreography is really, really fun. So for people who love action in their comic books, the choreography is wonderful, because it's not only just sword choreography. It's actually, so far, it's not that much sword choreography, but the cleverness, the Jackie Chanedness of how you're moving your action around is very good.
Thank you so much, Alex.
Yeah, that's a big one. And then also, we just mentioned it, I think, once or twice, but the Creeps is great. I really, really,
Thank you so much.
I am so not the market for that, but I really, really, really dug it.
I had so much fun working on those books, and that's one of the ones where, again, outside the publisher's control, when the first book came out, the entire sales team had quit, and they didn't about 6 months before, and they didn't find new ones until about 3 months after the launch. So it just released into a vacuum. So the sales never were commensurate to what I hoped the project merited.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that had there been a sales team in place that the project
no guarantees,
sold
right?
Well, there's no guarantees, but it had no chance of selling well, and that bummed me out. So I only got to do 3 of those, but I would have done 20 of them. They were so much fun.
They're a total hoot. It's a it's a great cast. It's your group, and there's just a lot of good dynamics, and yeah, and it's got a great heart. It's got a great heart in there.
Well,
So
thank you so very much. That one was a real joy to work on.
I get it.
And it was my favorite project up until the current one. I think the current one may bypass it, but it was.
It's hard to not love your current love the
Yeah,
most.
absolutely.
Chris, I could keep going on. And I say this almost every episode, so it's not
Well, no, it's
disingenuous.
great to talk to you, Alex. Thank you so much for bringing me on, for spotlighting the work. I really, really do appreciate it. I enjoy your show. I'm looking forward to hearing what the new format is like. Yeah, thanks for having me on, and thanks to everybody who gave it a listen.
Thanks, buddy.
It's been over a month since we recorded, and I've thought a lot about the things that we've talked about. The big one is how Chris combines disparate passions into one beautiful thing. It's not just writing and drawing, but martial arts and his love of history. I just so admire how he has the prescience to pull it all together into an object. Take his love of swords. Rather than obsessively draw them in a sketchbook for personal gratification, he produces a book as a viable test case for his current graphic novel. We talked about setting things up storytelling wise as dominoes, and he's stepped outside of the actual events within a book and applies that to his career. And I think that's such an admirable way of approaching his craft. I know there's such a daunting nature to consider making something for others from the things that you love, the fear that they won't love it too, but making things like this is a variation on what I call the cat fancy magazine principle. There's an audience for everything, and all you have to do is find them and make your work undeniable to them, which of course is an incredibly tough task, but nothing comes quick, nothing comes easy, but I think the end satisfaction is far higher than anything else. I've also thought a bunch about Chris's interest in the people, as he puts it, outside of the castle. And I fucking love it when I read or see something bold enough to show major events from the sidelines. It supports the tenet that everyone is the protagonist in their own story, just like country music and Springsteen songs. So I'm excited to take this challenge on in a future story of my own. Bring the relatable every guy to the edge of the spotlight and see how this affects their life and internal structure.